took that big leap and I quit my job. I think it's extremely important to listen to a wide range of people for a lot of different reasons. That I can learn something from every single person that I interact with, whether they're older than me, younger than me, similar background, totally different, regardless of their level of accomplishment. There's always more for us to learn. We all know far less than we do know.
Zuby, musician and entrepreneur. Born in the UK and growing up in Saudi Arabia before attending Oxford University, to then selling thousands of albums around the world, his communication skills and commentary have landed him features with Joe Rogan, Ben Shapiro, Piers Morgan and Tucker Carlson, as well as becoming friends with Elon Musk, interviewing him for his own show.
The cost of not knowing is one of the greatest costs of today, because they don't see what they're missing out on, because maybe we have too much ego going forwards because we think that followers equal worth. The Joe Rogan experience, right? So the biggest podcast in the world. And so he invited you on, am I right in saying 2019?
Something a bit surreal about even just going into the room, because I'd seen that room and that table and this chair and mic set up so many times on my phone screen, and I'm there and like Joe's just in front of me and I'm a bit like, is this real? So Elon started following me beginning of 2023. I started noticing him replying to my tweets like late 2022. He'd slid in my DMs. I remember the first message just said, Elon here.
I've got a quick favour to ask you. Nearly 90% of people listening to this podcast right now don't follow or subscribe to us. And my goal is to get that down to 80%. So if you've ever liked an episode or a clip that we've put out, please could you click that follow or subscribe button. It helps us more than you know to bring more guests onto the podcast and put out better and better content for you. Thank you. Before we dive into this episode, I want to take a second to speak about our sponsor, Pith and Stem, who we are thrilled to have on this journey with us. As someone who is always looking for ways to improve my healthy hustle, Pith and Stem's drop-top desk stood out to me as the best full work-from-home solution on the market. The world of work from home is changing, and a laptop or screen perched on your lap or dining room table isn't enough anymore. It's imperative that we have a solution at home that matches our productivity station that we can have in our office. But of course, homes weren't made to be worked in, and not all of us want a dedicated study. That's why I'm so happy that Pith and Stem created this perfect solution. They designed this desk with both the needs of the professional and their home in mind. It's perfect because it allows me to have a full productivity station that suits my needs and helps me get the most out of every minute that I spend at it, not only so I work comfortably, but that I actually enjoy it. And the best thing about drop-top, I can close and lock it at the end of the day to keep work and home separate. And it looks awesome on the wall. You can get your drop-top desk anywhere in the world from pithandstem.com, or just Google drop-top and you'll find it pretty quickly.
So Zuby, in 2025, why should anyone listen to what you've got to say?
So that they can determine if they should.
Okay. Can you expand on that?
Sure. By listening, you can make a determination as an individual, subjectively, if you think that I am someone whose opinions and perspectives are worth listening to. Millions of people around the world have said yes to that question implicitly, but it's for each individual. We all find value in different things, but I would like to think that in the next hour, I will say something that is interesting or insightful enough that it's worth somebody's time.
As someone who has got millions of followers and has built up over time, how important do you think it is that you take careful consideration to follow someone or to listen to what they're saying before you start to really hone into what their message might be in this day and age?
That's a good question. I think it's extremely important to listen to a wide range of people for a lot of different reasons. As Jordan Peterson has said, assume that the person you're talking to knows something that you don't. And that's something that I've probably lived by since my childhood. I move around the earth and interact with it under the assumption that I can learn something from every single person that I interact with, whether they're older than me, younger than me, similar background, totally different, regardless of their level of accomplishment. There's always more for us to learn. We all know far less than we do know. And whether or not you even like or agree with somebody, you can learn something from them if you really think about it. Sometimes that's learning what not to do and how not to be. But you could make an argument that that is equally as important as knowing how to be and the things that you should do. I think it's important. It's just as important Yeah, it's just as important to know what not to do as it is to know what to do, because there's many mistakes that we can make in this life which are catastrophic. And even the ones that are not catastrophic, it's much better to learn from other people's errors than to learn from your own. Sometimes, you have to stick your hand on the stove and get burned personally to learn the lesson. We've all been through that in various ways, but you don't have to do that every single time. So I'm generally a big fan of being open-minded and doing my best. It's not always easy, but doing my best to listen more than I speak. And I say this as someone who speaks for a living, but I try to listen more than I speak and, use the ears and mouth in the ratio that God gave them to me.
I think it's so interesting because it reminds me of a quote, maybe it's Hormozy or someone who talks about the cost of not knowing is one of the greatest costs of today, because people go through the world or the earth or their life, whatever we're talking about, and they don't see what they're missing out on, because maybe we have too much ego going forwards because we think that followers equal worth, or we think that by meeting other people we're by osmosis learning, but you're not. You're not taking it on board because of the ego, which is blocking you. So I think it's really interesting that you have that sort of that way of looking at something like you're missing out if you don't speak to someone or listen to someone, or understand that literally everyone, from the cleaner to the pilot to the entrepreneur to the politician, everyone is better than you at something.
Yes.
And I think that's so, so important. And also you built a following predominantly on Twitter to start with, right? So a written format. So how has it changed, or what is the difference, you think, when you've got a written format where someone's built up thought leadership or knowledge versus today where a lot of people are building followings just from short form video, where you're just really playing with an algorithm and playing with dopamine delivery?
That's an interesting question. I think that written draws in general a better audience. A lot of people don't read. And of the people who read, not everyone is great at comprehending things. I believe reading and reading comprehension are actually two different skills. And I think that I say this as someone who uses a broad range of different social media platforms. And one thing that I've always liked about Twitter, or now X, is the fact that it is text-based. I think that makes it more meritocratic, as in it's difficult to get 100,000, let alone 1 million followers just by being good looking. Unless you already happen to be a celebrity or a massive public figure. You can do that on visual-based platforms like Instagram. There's, people who are, just so pretty or handsome that they have huge followings. They don't really have anything particularly insightful or interesting to say, or if they do, they're not publicly saying it. Maybe they have it, but they're keeping it to themselves. Whereas I think on X, it's just a little more meritocratic. When people are following you there, it's because they like what you're saying and something is really resonating with them. So I think that just in general, on average, attracts a higher quality of follower who also has more of a buy-in with you, and more of a connection, because they're there for your ideas and your thoughts and your perspective, rather than just your looks or your lifestyle or something that you've got. I think you have to be more insightful in order to draw and attract a following on there.
I agree, and I'd add to that, I really like long form content, so long form YouTube, podcast. I use LinkedIn a lot.
Okay.
I don't tweet, but I read stuff on Twitter. And for me, I think I would add that it's trust as well.
Yes.
So if someone does something on written form or long form or the podcast, I think you build more trust. And I always think if I think something, it's probably not just me thinking that. I think there's much higher trust there.
You make an interesting point. I'll tell you another difference, actually, as someone who's been on social media for, over 20 years at this point, which is crazy to say. More than half my life I've been on social media. Instagram and oftentimes YouTube, and certainly shorts or reels, they're highlight reels. X is almost the opposite. You see the worst side of people.
That's true. That's true.
For whatever reason, people bring out their worst side on there. And so your point of the trust, and I guess what goes with that is the authenticity, is you really get to see who people are more than just the, oh, look, here's a happy photo of me, or here's a video of me doing something cool. You get to see how, not just how they interact with the public in general, but also how they respond to individuals. How do you respond to hate and criticism? How do you respond to praise? How do you respond to somebody disagreeing with you? How do you, like, all of that? the veil just comes down on that platform. Sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. But you really get to know who people are. Like there are many people who I used to like and respect until I discovered their Twitter accounts, right? And there's a smaller number where that's gone in the opposite direction. And I don't know, there's something more visceral about it and more real time and more conversational that prevents it from just being a highlight reel, and you can see the authenticity a little more. So I think there's something about that.
Yeah, and that word authenticity, I think last week we released an episode with Lara Costa, who's like the #1 female LinkedIn creator in the world. And she spoke about how she's falling out of love with the word authenticity. Not the meaning and what it is, but the word, because everyone's saying be more authentic. Yeah. But they're doing things like saying, oh, last week I lost a 7-figure deal, but it's okay, I got 5 6-figure deals. They're trying to show it as a highlight reel, even though it's supposed to be a negative, right? And she's talking about how to be authentic, you actually have to believe it, and you have to knock your ego and allow yourself to see the failures. And LinkedIn's going through this cringy phase where it's just the highlight reel because people are coming from Instagram onto there. Whereas it's interesting to see someone who uses X or Twitter so much so that they, you can see that it's actually almost a failure reel and a very, very highly opinionated place. I think Elon Musk quite often says it's like the worst place. It's like the worst place in society to see thoughts and opinions. Yeah. Or the best, but it's also the harsh.
Yeah, it's really, there's a polarity to it. And I think that's something that people can certainly get addicted to. But I find a lot of value in it. And if you are someone who does have ideas and does have opinions and does have perspectives and wants to actually connect with people, I think by far, hands down, and I've thought this for over a decade, I think when you actually think of what the term social network means, Twitter and now X has been the best one for over a decade, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of actually being a social network, not just being a content platform or a video distribution platform or something like that, but where people actually connect and engage and socialize and discuss and debate. It's, to me, hands down, clearly the best one.
I genuinely think the best people on social media right now have come from Twitter. So, yourself or Stephen Bartlett of the world or Hormozy or Sahil Bloom, they all started with Twitter and just putting out thoughts and opinions and, like you say, engaging with other people and being shown that they're wrong, sometimes shown that they're right. And they get hundreds of thousands of followers, not millions like you get on Instagram where someone who's got no value has got 20 million followers and you're not quite sure why. I think that's...
Well, I'd hesitate to say no value because I don't think you can have 20 million followers without offering some type of value. Maybe it's not the type of stuff that you or I resonate with or appreciate, but I often make the point that, you can't really... Value is a bit of an odd term. People value very, very different things. There are some things that I just think are asinine and silly, and I don't know why anyone cares about it or wants to watch it or follow it. It's just not my cup of tea, as we say in the UK. But that cuts in all different directions. There are people out there, I've seen people debating how on earth I have 1 million plus followers, and they're like, he doesn't say anything interesting, he just says basic stuff, blah blah blah. I'm like, cool, that's your opinion, but obviously there are lots of people out there who find some value in it and do find something positive that they can add to their life from probably not all of the things that I say, but some of it.
No, I think it's well said. There's obviously value in. We spoke about Mr. Beast a little bit earlier, right? Before we started recording, does 250 million views per video. I'm not the target audience. It's young people, almost kids who want to watch this kind of stuff. But like you said, you're right. There's obviously enormous value in the marketplace.
Do you know, it's an interesting one because the old school debate on that always used to be the whole why are footballers paid more than doctors and nurses kind of thing. And that's when you have to kind of explain free market economics to people because they're like, are you saying a footballer, does 100 times, 1,000 times more, adds that much more value to society? It's like, well, no. To me, a better question would be why do so many people like football so much that they can afford to pay that guy tens of millions of pounds?
It's the same conversation in the US with the NBA versus WNBA,
Absolutely.
Right? And they said all you've got to look at is the number of viewers that you get. That then shows the disparity in the pay, which obviously it can be a touchy topic.
Go ask the women why they'd rather watch the men than the women.
Oh, there you go. Exactly.
Yeah.
Answers the question. Zuby, I want to take you back.
Sure.
So born in the UK, then moved to Saudi at a very young age. What was it like there? What was it like growing up there in the late 80s, early 90s? Because obviously we're in Dubai now, 2025. It's a very different place in the Middle East. But what or how did it help shape the person you are now?
Yeah. So first of all, for me and most of my friends and my siblings, growing up in Saudi, when we did and where we did was awesome. It was wonderful. I couldn't really ask for a better childhood from every angle. I think it's also worth saying that I can only speak from my experience, and I'm fully aware that growing up in Saudi Arabia as an expat living in an expat community and camp is not going to be the same as being a Saudi national and growing up in a big city or something like that. I always feel like I have to give this caveat, even though that's kind of true for anywhere anyone could grow up. If someone just says, what's it like growing up in the UK, or what's it like growing up in the USA? It's like, for who, where?
Yeah.
Like, it's a pretty big question, right? It's great for some people, terrible for some people, usually somewhere in the middle. But I had a great experience. One thing that was a massive blessing for sure at the time, but especially in hindsight, and I think I appreciate it more and more as I get older, was just having exposure to such a broad range of different cultures and types of people and different backgrounds, from nationality to ethnicity to religious background. From very young, I was just surrounded by everybody. So just like it is here in Dubai, where it is truly multi-ethnic, multicultural, you've just got people from all over the globe who are in this city. It was very similar for me on a smaller scale. So from the time I was in preschool and kindergarten, I just had friends from every conceivable background, essentially. And then I had heavy exposure, family originally being from Nigeria, living in Saudi Arabia, being British, and going back to the UK a lot. But then also I was in the American schooling system. And lots of my friends and my teachers were American and Canadian, which is part of why I don't even have a British accent, right? So being in that schooling system. And then when I was 11 years old, I went to boarding school in the UK. So I don't know, by the time I was 10 years old, I'd probably been to at least 8 or 9 different countries, I guess. And that's not something that most people get to experience in a lifetime, let alone in their childhood. And so when I do what I do now, and I'm just offering my perspectives on the world, and I'm sharing my ideas, and I'm giving things for people to ponder and consider, and sharing some of the conclusions I've reached, I'm not just doing that from a place of, okay, I've been in this one location and only been surrounded by a very specific type of people, and that's the sole perspective that I'm coming from. It's more from a range of different angles and perspectives. It's not this is just a take from, a British perspective, or from an American perspective, or from a Middle Eastern perspective. It's this weird mix. And then, of course, it's also my individuality and my personality and my experiences. But it's definitely given me a broader range of perspective and a more high definition worldview than a lot of people are afforded, or a lot of people have, just because most people do not travel, have not traveled, let alone lived in so many different places and met such a broad, I in person, I've met over 500,000 people in real life. Wow. Like met and had conversations, which is more than most people, by far more than most people do in a lifetime. A lot of that was because I used to promote my music just out there in public and sell my CDs on the street and just talk to thousands of people a week. And now I'm doing that online as well. So I just find, as we were talking about earlier, the more people you talk to, the more you travel, the more of the world you can experience. We're all going to have a relatively low resolution worldview, because you can't, you could spend a lifetime talking to as many people as you want and visiting every single country and corner of it, and you're still going to have a pretty poor understanding of humanity in the world. But you'll have a higher resolution worldview than someone who just lives their entire life in a small corner of Earth and has no interest in going outside it. So your determinations and conclusions, and maybe most importantly, even predictions, are more likely to be accurate, and you're less likely to speak in, or at least believe in, uber broad overgeneralizations, and you're less likely to fall into some of the traps of just unnuanced thinking. When we don't understand something, when we do have that low resolution view of a place or a people or an idea, we tend to fill in the gaps with our biases and assumptions and, oh, well, I heard this thing once on social media or whatever. It's why I'm sure you've experienced this. You live in Dubai, right? So when you tell people that, you get quite a range of responses from quite high resolution ones from people who maybe also live there or have lived there or visited many times, and they've got quite an accurate view of what it's like. And then you also get ones that are so far off base.
Totally.
Right? So far off base and so weirdly, like sometimes just fabricated and false. Sometimes, maybe there's like a shred of truth to something that's said, but it's still massively inaccurate. And oftentimes, the less understanding people have, the more sometimes they even speak with a huge level of confidence. And then you're like, oh, interesting. When did you visit? And they're like, oh, I've never been. I would never step foot. I would never step foot there. It's like, okay, so why do you have such a strong, and they could say something and you're like, that's quite literally not true.
Yeah.
And they're 100% convinced that it is true. And again, this is why it's important to listen to people and assume maybe they know something that you don't, particularly when they have very firsthand experience of it.
You're bang on there, especially with the Dubai sort of ethos, because I think for me, it's also not even just people, it's also by country. So some countries are completely against the idea of Dubai. Dubai is one example. The other one we also get is just entrepreneurship. So leaving your corporate job to go and start a business. So many people just cannot comprehend that. And I don't think that's low vibration thinking. That's just something that they're inexperienced with, which is really what we're talking about here. Just the experience that you had by the time you went to boarding school, age 11 in the UK. The worldly view and the experience you had was far superior to most people, probably 99% of people at that age. So then what was it like when you got to that boarding school? And I'm assuming there were other people who had come from other countries in the boarding school. Usually there is.
Yeah, predominantly.
So how did you find settling back into the UK and being in that environment, which was such a juxtaposition from being in Saudi?
It was just an extension. It was a widening of my worldview and increasing the resolution even further. And it was cool because while I was in boarding school and also while I was in university, I still lived in Saudi Arabia. So during term time, I was in the UK. And then during every holiday, Christmas, Easter, summer, I'm back in Saudi Arabia. So I'm going back and forth between these two different countries, which are different in a lot of ways. And I've got different friendship groups and acquaintance groups in each of them. And I'm here and I'm learning more about the UK and British culture and British people, as well as meeting all of these other guys and then eventually guys and girls from all over the world. And you're having those different experiences. And yeah, all of it is, I believe all of it is beneficial. All of it was valuable. And I'm blessed to have the type of personality where a lot of the, particularly when you're on the younger end of things, 11 years old, 12 years old, 13, there were a lot of kids in school who suffered with homesickness and who really struggled being away from their parents, being away from their families, being away from their home country. That's not something I struggled with a lot, thankfully. And I even at that young age, I viewed it more like an adventure and an opportunity rather than, oh my gosh, my parents have sent me away to this strange foreign place. It was just like, oh, this is pretty cool. Like,
yeah.
Cool. I've got ability to make all these new friends and have these new experiences. The sports that I changed completely switched over when I was in Saudi. Like my main sport was baseball, and then baseball doesn't really exist in England. So suddenly I'm playing rugby, and
I thought you were going to say rounders or something.
I've tried that too.
Yeah,
I'm playing cricket. I'm not a big cricket fan, but I picked up different sports and different slang, and it was cool, and it's part of why I can code switch depending on if I'm speaking between, if I'm talking to an American or an American audience, then my language and vocabulary automatically switches, and then if I'm in a British crowd, it sort of
really,
it switches because there's different words for different things, right? So, you go from candy and cookies to sweets and biscuits, and it's just automatic. It's not a pavement, it's a sidewalk. It's this, it's that, right? Trunk, boot. Like there's tons
so
of
many nuances.
Yeah, but for me, it's not even something I kind of consciously have to think of. It's just an automatic thing. I communicate for a living, right? So I want people to be able to understand me. So depending on what audience I'm speaking to, I will do my best to frame things in a way that they can understand it without, being confused by something that I'm saying.
If you've always been very multicultural, right? Living in different places, having lots of different experiences. Have you ever found it hard to call a place a home, or like ground yourself in one place?
Yeah, but I don't think that's a disadvantage.
Okay.
Yeah, I know for a lot of people that's something that's very important to them. I've heard, I don't know who came up with this terminology, and I would credit them if I did know, but there's this concept of, some people being somewheres. Is it somewheres and nowheres?
Sure.
Or somewheres and anywheres almost, and I'm an anywhere. So I'm not someone who feels a super strong need to be able to call one place my home. And I don't get it's obvious from interacting with so many people and having conversations with people that I think most people, it's fair to say, have a strong attachment to a location. They consider somewhere this is my hometown, this is my home country, this is where I'm from, and to the point that some of them never, ever, ever want to leave it. And so you might talk to someone in the UK who's even frustrated by the UK, but like they quote unquote can't leave because this is my home. So no matter what happens or no matter what other opportunities present themselves, they might not even be able to leave their town, right? They might be from Leeds and they can't even move to London. It's like, no, I need to stay in Leeds. And I think that's a human norm. But I don't personally have it. And I think that it's worked to my advantage to have it. It can make the introduction of certain conversations a little complicated because people always ask, where are you from? And it's a bit of a long answer for myself because I can't really just say one place, because if I say one place, all it does is lead to more confusion. Because if I just say I'm from the UK, they're like, well, why do you sound American? Did you grow up in America? And I'm like, no, actually, I've never lived in America, but I grew up in Saudi Arabia. They're like, so why do you sound American? And you got to kind of go through the different steps and stages. And then other people, they're looking at me and they're like, well, obviously you're African descent, right? So even if someone asks me where I'm from, do they mean citizenship? Do they mean where I was born? Do they mean like what's my ethnic background? So yeah, I'm happy to answer all of those, but yeah, I think it's given me a lot of versatility and flexibility, where I get attached to people a lot more than places. So even if I think about missing the UK, I left the UK almost 4 years ago at this point. And if someone asks me if I miss the UK, yeah, there's some things about the actual country that I do miss and I like to go back and see and experience. But it's more family and friends and the people than the place itself that I feel a strong attachment to.
I think I completely agree with that. And interestingly, this is a weird anecdote, but both my parents and my parents-in-law moved house from their family homes. I grew up in one house, obviously I've been part of the other family for a long time. Both of them moved houses in the same year. And then you realize very quickly that house is not important. It's actually just wherever those families are. Yes. Which is almost exactly the same as what you're saying, right? You get attached to the people. You just think it's encased by wherever they are, or what country or house or whatever. It's actually the feelings of where the person is, right? It's whatever that emotion is, which I think is really, really interesting. It actually sounds obvious, but people don't understand it, which is why they can't
Maybe
leave.
it's because for most people, it's never parsed out. Because for most people, those two concepts are the same thing. So where their family is and where home is are one and the same.
Yes.
So maybe they even think, I'm spitballing here, maybe they even think they have the attachment to the place, but maybe it's actually that it's the people still. It's just that all the people are in that place. Yeah. And so it's not parsed out unless you're someone whose hometown is different from where your family and friends predominantly are. Yeah.
So that's very true, actually. So both these families moved hundreds of miles from where their homes were. So then it's more of a thing. Whereas if they'd stayed in the same town, you'd be like, oh, maybe it was the house, maybe it wasn't the house. Yeah. I don't know.
Maybe that's where that old cliche saying, home is where the heart is, comes from.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. Zuby, you've got a degree from Oxford University in computer science. Mm-hmm. At what point did you stop using that and go into music? Because that's not an easy thing to have achieved. If you're 16, 17, 18, to get into Oxford, to do that degree, will have been a hard and dedicated route. Yeah. So I'm interested to know, when did you then stop that and go, I'm going to follow my heart?
Yeah, it was hard, man. The hardest interviews I've ever done were the interviews to get into Oxford University. And I had 6. I had more than anyone else that I'm aware of to this date. Most people have 2 or 3. I had 6 for some reason. And those were, man, if you put me in those interviews again, I'm not sure I would get into, I'm not sure I'd get into that university again, because that was hardcore.
I just want to briefly interrupt this podcast so I can talk to you about Nutrition Kitchen, who have kindly sponsored this episode. As entrepreneurs who are looking to stay as healthy as possible, fueling ourselves with high quality food without breaking the bank or wasting time can be tough day to day. Nutrition Kitchen solves that issue by delivering incredible meals to your door, tailored to your diet, whether you're trying to lose weight, build muscle, or maintain balance. They change their menus all the time so you can choose from a variety of dishes and leave the monotony of meal prepping behind. Now, back to our guest.
So there was an overlap. I mean, I was in university when I started my music career. So I started rapping in my first year of uni, and I released my first album in my second year of uni. So it wasn't like this one ends and this one begins. They coincided and overlapped. So I put out my first album when I was 19, my second year of university. It was an album called Commercial Underground, 8 songs. And that was when I first started selling my CDs, and I started performing live, predominantly in Oxford, but also a little bit in London. In fact, my first ever gig was actually in Saudi Arabia, in my hometown. So I started performing, and that's when it started to shift a bit more from a hobby to something that was like, maybe I could make a career out of this. I wasn't making like, a lot of money or something, but I think by the time I left university, I'd sold at least 1,000 copies of my first album, which isn't bad for hand-to-hand sales. And then after I graduated, I took a year out and did music full-time for 1 year. And I released my second album, which was called The Unknown Celebrity. That was 2008. And then after that, I already had a job lined up before I graduated, but I deferred it for 1 year. So I moved to London in 2008. And I actually started working in management consulting while doing my music stuff on the side. So I was living this dual life where during the daytime, suit and tie, working for the man in these big corporations. And then in the evenings and weekends I was still going out, Saturdays in particular, I was still going out and selling my CDs in different towns and cities. And I was still playing live gigs here and there. And then entering into late 2010, early 2011, the two careers started to get in the way of each other increasingly, because I was making progress in both of them, but progress in one was starting to negatively impact progress in the other one. And I knew what I wanted to be doing. I was good at my corporate job, but I knew that this isn't what I want to be doing 10, 20, 30 years from now. So in, I guess it would be September 2011, I took that big leap, and I quit my job. And I've been self-employed ever since then, 13 and a half years now. And if I were to think in terms of decisions I've made in my life that I'm grateful for, that would definitely have to be in the top. I think that would be in the top 3, certainly top 5, but probably top 3 decisions that I ever made to quit that corporate job and just go pursue my music full time, because all the things that I've done since then and everything that people know me for, and essentially everything, 99.9% of what people now know me for, I don't think it would and could have happened had I stayed on that path. And
it's such a risk at a young age, right? The biggest risk you would have taken up to your life probably was leaving that job and pursuing something that you weren't sure was going to work. Obviously there was...
Do you know what? I didn't view it that way.
Okay.
No, it was almost inverted.
It was a risk to stay in the corporate world.
Oh, absolutely. Nice. Comfort is dangerous. Had I just stayed there, because I knew it would have been a very predictable living. My life would have been way more simple. Yeah, for sure. Far less fun and fulfilling. But I was on a pretty clear trajectory. Right? It was like, cool. I'm here. I'm 24 years old. I know. I literally can predict what level I'll be at and even what money I'll be making. By the time I'm 34, by the time I'm 44, so on. And so, but from my late teens, I've been really clear, strangely clear on what my mission and purpose in this world is. And I knew I could not achieve it there. And I also knew that I was at a certain point in my life that I wouldn't be in again, where I could do that move and take that quote unquote risk in the way that I could. Because my thought was just like, look, I'm never going to be on the street shaking a cup. Thank God. All right. I'm smart. I've got my degree. I've also got my family. Like I'm never going to be homeless. Even if, I don't know, I go out there and I try all this music and creative stuff and whatever reason it doesn't work out. Okay. You know what I mean? Maybe I'll have to come back home with my tail between my legs and, you know, knock on my parents' house and be like, you know what, like, and, you know, get the dust off the CV and go, right? Like that's the worst case scenario, which let's be real. That's just like, that's not even a bad scenario. That's like living a normal life, having a good career. But I knew that as I get older and as I potentially take on more responsibilities, even just as I start to earn more in this career in the corporate world and I start climbing that ladder, it's going to be harder to leave the more I stay here. If I stay here until I'm 30 and say I reach like a role in management or something and I'm now making, you know, I'm making pretty good money and it's comfortable and I know everyone and I've been here for 8 years or whatever, it doesn't mean you can't leave, but it's going to be harder. And I was just at that point of like, look, I've got everything to gain. I've got nothing to lose. Let's go for this. And also, I have a delusional level of self-belief. To me, it's not delusional because I know what I'm capable of. But to other people who don't know me and understand me and certainly don't live in my brain, I've always had a level of self-belief that some people mistake for arrogance. It's not arrogance. It's just true self-belief. And I knew I would succeed. I didn't know exactly what that path would look like. And the path it's taken over the past 13 years is very different from what I imagined. Yeah. But I knew that if I put 100% of my time and my energy into music and entrepreneurship and creative endeavors, I will quote unquote make it somehow, some way. There's no way that I truly apply myself to this thing and I don't reach some level of success. I don't know how far it'll go, but it's going to go somewhere. So that was also my mindset as well. Because there were some people, I remember when I left, I could tell people who knew me and people who didn't. Because people who knew me, which is a minority, they didn't ask me this question. But people who don't know me well were like, oh, like, how long are you going to give it? And I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, yeah, like, how long are you going to, you know, try this music thing or this entrepreneurship thing? 6 months, 12 months, 2 years. I was like, yeah, you don't get it. I'm done. Yeah. I'm out.
Which is so funny, because I had a very similar thing. And it was actually when you said about the predictable path. When I was 25 or 26, my boss, who was 35 or 36, he was like, in 10 years' time, you can be where I am with this job and this salary. And that was the thing that switched me off from the whole journey, because I was like, 10 years of my life to do that. I just don't see the point. But what I'm interested in, Zuby, is you're a communicator now, through music, through written form, through your podcast, which we'll touch on momentarily. But when you sold those CDs, you traveled to 60 plus cities and towns around the UK, meeting tens of thousands of people, selling your CD literally by hand. What did you learn about communication then, which has allowed you to then do what you do now?
The first thing I'd say is obliterating my fear of strangers.
That's a good one.
So going out there and talking to hundreds of thousands of people and being rejected hundreds of thousands of times and being embraced tens of thousands of times and going through, I mean, I had almost every response imaginable I have experienced, not online, but face to face in the real world, in strange and random towns and cities with strangers. And so firstly, yeah, most people have a fear of strangers. In fact, most people are taught to have a fear of strangers. It's something that's put into us from when we're young, by our parents in most cases, to help keep us safe, understandably. But most people carry that on into adulthood. It's why, you know, if you ask most people, oh, you know, go and talk to that guy over there, or even to ask for directions, most people, their heart starts beating quite quickly. And so I don't have that. Like I killed that, right? like you have to. It's just gone, right? And then perhaps another part would be, gosh, there's so many. I'm trying to articulate it because a lot of the lessons are quite implicit, and
of course,
I'm trying to think of the best way to articulate them. I'd say one of them is that a lot of strangers are friends you haven't met yet. So if you think of it in that way, that also helps to, number one, crush that hesitancy and fear of strangers, but also to realize that with each person, it's an opportunity. So of course, with me, who's out there promoting and selling my music, if I don't talk to anyone, I make no sales and I make £0. My income requires me to talk to strangers, so I'm forced to do it. But also, I had so many countless wonderful and positive interactions with people. There are people who I now, to this day, consider friends, and I met them out on the street selling CDs. And, to this day, I call them friends. And that happens as well. Now that also happens with me on social media. In fact, the vast majority of people I met, quote unquote, I met them online first before I met them in person, which is kind of strange, but I guess it's kind of become normal. So that's definitely another factor. Another would be that I think there's a lot of good people in the world. There's a lot of kind people. One thing that was certainly a realization, and I think most creators or entrepreneurs go through this realization, which is that you may be surprised that complete strangers often will support you more than people close to you. I'm blessed that I have great friends and family who support me a lot and have done from early, but a lot of people don't actually. And they may think that in their starting their new business or writing their new book or releasing they may think that, oh, my friends and my family I can really lean on, but you'll be surprised. There'll be just strangers out there who see your vision and want to support you and will support you and motivate you and encourage you both verbally and financially and coming to your event or whatever it is more than the people close to you, which can be kind of bittersweet. I've definitely gone through periods where I felt like disappointment in someone like I know personally who I thought, oh man, I thought these people would kind of support me a bit more. Like, why is it these random, why is it random people who are kind of supporting me more? But I don't think that's unique to me. I think that happens with most entrepreneurs, and there's a lot of different reasons for it. But that's definitely a realization I went through more than once. And then beyond that, I would just say actual communication skills of how to verbalize and articulate your thoughts and ideas, how to handle rejection. I guess that's a big one.
Resilience.
Oh, for sure. Gosh, you got to have a super tough skin, man. Because you meet a lot of great people, but you also meet some terrible ones. You meet the whole spectrum of humanity.
Yeah.
And there are people who will be mean and harsh to you for absolutely no reason. Well, no reason from your perspective. Maybe they're just having a bad day. Yeah. Maybe they're just wired that way. I don't know what it is. But you experience that too, but it's a minority. Certainly a minority.
So you're doing the music thing after you've left the corporate world. You did the corporate world for a few years. And then you start to build this online following. So it's building up tens of thousands of followers. I'm interested in the first time that you went viral. Because I just think it's a really interesting outlook on almost not a career. It's not fair to say a career, but how you've gone from music to actually communication and the commentary side of what you do. Because there's music there. There's also the podcasting. You've also been on some of the biggest podcasts in the world. Big following of really hyper engaged people who are interested in your views on stuff. So I'm interested in how that started. How did the commentary side of things start to come into your social media world? And then what was the thing that sort of took you to the moon, as it were, to start with?
Yeah, sure. So I guess in terms of social commentary, I've always done that to some degree as a rapper.
Okay. Sure.
Right? So it starts with the music. You're expressing your thoughts and your feelings about your life and the world and everything, all of that. So it didn't technically start from nothing. It was already in the music. And then it was really the world changing around me. It was seeing the West in general, but society, culture, things just changing and going in a direction in certain ways that I particularly did not like and did not approve of, and which I thought would have negative consequences for our society as a whole. I started to really notice a shift in the mid-2010s. And then approaching the late 2010s, it got to a point where I wasn't seeing a lot of people publicly saying what I was thinking. And so I was like, well, if other people aren't saying this thing, I'm going to just say it. Right? Like, I didn't feel like this was my calling or sometimes even my place in a way, but I just started putting my thoughts out there, and whoa, people just started resonating with it in a massive way. Now, the very first post I had that went super viral was my famous post, 6 years ago now, February 26, 2019. This was me pulling 230 kilos off the ground in a deadlift and saying that I identify as a woman and I've just broken the British women's deadlift record. And that went bonkers. I had 19,000 followers when I posted it, and it ended up reaching over 4 million views on Twitter alone. It also went viral on Instagram, on Facebook, on Reddit. And then lots of the follow-up interviews I did after it also went viral as well. So suddenly I'm finding myself in the middle of this controversy around, should males who identify as women be competing in female sports, and what should the rules and laws be about this, and what about just this whole transgender issue in general, and what about gender issues in general, and what about just what's going on in the West and politics and this and this. And I just had a lot of people around the world, some with massive platforms, some with smaller ones, who just wanted to invite me onto my shows and talk to me and allow me to share my perspective. And then once I started doing that, it just started resonating with even more people. And there was this kind of feedback loop where you gain followers and you get opportunities, and that leads to more followers, and more people want to hear your thoughts and opinions. And it's quite fascinating, because if I think of that particular issue, and I guess a few other ones, I mean, I was just saying what most people were thinking, but most people were afraid to say it, or maybe they didn't feel like they had the communication skills or the platform to articulate it. And so sometimes you get thrust into these situations and positions, and it's not necessarily the way you set out to do it. Like, I'm a rapper, I'm a musician. People now, 6 years later, know me for a lot of other things, but at the time I was really just a musician.
But what I think is really important there, and I want to highlight, is that it's not as if you went viral for one thing and then have been known for that. No. You already had the framework and the ideas and the commentary before. And 20,000 followers, a lot of followers on Twitter. So all that happened really is that one thing went viral, then people were like, oh God, he's been speaking about quite a good stuff for quite a long time, and he'll continue to do so based on what's happening now, which obviously then came the coronavirus. But I think that's really worth highlighting, as we touched on earlier about people going viral for things that aren't quote unquote valuable. Yours was valuable, just an audience happened to find you through a couple of different modern mediums. Do
you know what the funniest things about this, I like to kind of like meta-analyze things. And to me, one of the most fascinating things about that post is the post itself, the video, is a good metaphor for what we're just talking about, and perhaps success in general. So some people might see that and be like, oh, he went viral just for like posting a silly deadlift video, and then, he was lucky, he just got a Rogan, he did all this. I'm like, okay, you make that video. Go in the gym and lift that. Do you know how long it took me to get strong enough to lift that weight, to break the British women's deadlift record? Think the average person could just walk in the gym and pull 230 kilos casually? No, they can't. Under 0.1% of the population can do that, right? So I think it's quite a good metaphor, because you see the tip of the iceberg, you see the final thing that is the catalyst, but you miss all of the previous 10 years of grind and blood and sweat and tears went into it. And so to me, it's kind of got like this multiple meaning, where it's like, it's also a metaphor for how that type of success happens.
It's a classic example of another overnight success, when you're not looking at the decades of work that happened before. You see people that pop up on social media, or they make millions, and you're like, oh, overnight success, bit of luck, and you're like, they've worked for so long.
You mentioned Mr. Beast earlier.
Yes.
If I'm correct, it took him at least 5 years to get 1,000 subscribers.
500 videos.
500 videos to get 1,000 subscribers. There we go. So I'm not even a Mr. Beast fan per se. I don't even think I've ever watched a full one of his videos, but I can certainly respect the grind he's put in. So a lot of people would look at what he's doing now and be like, oh, he's lucky, he just makes silly YouTube videos and gets all of these views and all of this money or whatever. But most people won't bother to think, to research and go, okay, how many thousands of hours has he dedicated? Whether or not you like his craft, it's not easy to dedicate thousands of hours to get good at anything. There are people who have spent thousands of hours doing things that, would I spend that much time doing it? No. Like, I've seen videos of a couple weeks ago. I was watching in Fascination as there was this young guy, I don't know if you saw the video, juggling Rubik's Cubes.
Oh, no.
And solving them.
No way.
So he broke the record for solving 3 Rubik's Cubes whilst juggling them. I don't know if it was like 4 minutes or something. He's literally juggling 3 Rubik's Cubes and he's solving them as you're doing it. Now, is that a skill I'm super keen to acquire? No. But I have a massive respect and fascination of just, number one, that's possible.
Yeah, how is it?
And number 2, you're just like, how much time and effort and practice and dedication did this guy put into this one ultra niche skill? Like, solving a Rubik's Cube is already pretty random.
Yeah.
But solving 3 is random. I want to solve 3 whilst juggling. And you watch it, and there's something, for me anyway, there's something in me as a human being and as a man which just like respects determination. Even if I don't really get the thing.
100%.
I'm just like, respect.
Yeah, good man.
Good on you.
So you're right. That video actually is completely a metaphor for just the modern day society, isn't it? And modern day how we look at things. I think I'm right in saying this still. Your favorite social media post that you've ever put out is a quote, and I'm probably going to butcher it, which says something along the lines of, "We need to stop looking for political realm solutions to spiritual realm problems."
Accurate paraphrase.
Perfect. So how does that link to what we've just spoken about in that video, right? Because we're almost looking for the wrong solutions to problems that we actually can solve in a very different way, which I think in my mind links to how that video has come about. Like, it's talking about a very specific niche problem in the world, but actually the bigger issue is how we're not looking at the right problems. We're trying to solve different things in different ways, which are irrelevant to what we're actually seeing in economics in the world, which is the downfall of lots of different countries for reasons that are not necessary.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting take on it, because I was actually speaking a little bit more specifically, but you can widen it in the context that you're doing, which is we often misdiagnose. We look at the wrong problems. Firstly, if I look at particularly the last decade across our nation and similar ones, let's say the Anglosphere, I think first of all, there's a problem in determining what even is a problem. So it's not even a misdiagnosis at that stage. It's there are things that are considered problems and no one's paused to think, is that even a problem? And then the opposite, where something is a problem and people are not treating it with the seriousness and the urgency that it may need. I'll give you a great example of this. I'll give you a great example. So in the UK and USA and Canada and so on, there is a running assumption amongst people, particularly on the more, I don't want to make it political, but generally more on the left side of the aisle, liberal, left, progressive, who have this idea that everything should be 50-50 gender balance. Okay? So they will see a field or a job or a sector or something, a music festival, and they'll see that it's 70% males, 30% females, or 80% males, 20% females, whatever. And they're like, that's a problem. We need to help make it 50-50. Why is it a problem? That's the first question. Is it a problem? Maybe there are some scenarios where it is, but in most of them, it isn't. So they're already now looking for a solution to this supposed problem. And I don't think I have ever, at least in the mainstream, heard someone even just express like, okay, why is that an issue? If someone is like, oh, it could be parliament, it could be politics, and it's probably, oh, it's male dominated and it's, there's 3 men for every woman, whatever. I'm like, okay, and? can think of plenty of sectors where that's the opposite. There's many sectors which are over 90% female dominated. Like if someone were complaining to me that 90% of nurses are female, and we need to get this to 50-50, I'd be like, why? What's wrong with 90% of nurses being female? Is somebody being discriminated against? Is there sexism going on? Is there misandry? Is there bias? Is there misogyny? Is it, are people not allowed? Is there a rule saying men are not allowed to do this job? It's like, no. I'm like, yeah, so who cares? So initially, there have been a lot of problems that people are contorting themselves into pretzels trying to solve. And I would question if it's even a problem or an issue in the first place. So that's the first one. You could widen this to other aspects of diversity and so on, right? And so that's the first one. And then the second is the misdiagnosis of just, okay, even maybe you found something is a problem, but then it's like, are you looking at the right root causes? So let's take another example. Let's take something from the UK. So there's a lot of talk about knife crime and, youth violence in general, but knife crime in particular, they focus on. And, are you diagnosing the right issue? Oftentimes they're looking at the object. They're having all this discussion about knife. How long should they be? How easy should they be to buy? Should we maybe have blunt kitchen knives instead of ones with points? Should you be allowed, right? And you're like, what about maybe this is a misdiagnosis. Why don't we talk about the human heart? Why don't we talk about circumstances people are growing up in? Why don't we talk about broken families, absent fathers, lack of things for youth to do, like all sorts. We can talk about religion. We can talk about philosophy. We can talk about lots of different aspects of this issue. Like this is an issue of the heart. Mm-hmm. We all have knives and we don't run around stabbing each other, right? So if someone is doing that, there is something behind or multiple things behind that's causing the behavior. Yeah. But instead of focusing on the behavior even, you're talking about, well, we need to regulate knives more, right? You're having these goofy conversations. And then this leads into the third point, which is not just the misdiagnosis, but the prescription.
Yeah.
Okay. So even if you diagnose the issue correctly, it's like, okay, now what's the prescription? Yeah. How do we solve it? And in each of those layers, sometimes sensible things are being said and done and proposed, but oftentimes they're not. Yeah. And it leads to a lot of chaos, and sometimes it leads to the problems worsening, or at minimum, a lot of things are not improving because of this. And I think that sadly, there are a lot of people in powerful positions and positions of leadership who, I don't know how much is incompetence versus malice versus stupidity versus just tribalism, preventing solutions from happening. But it's the reason why I think a lot of things have just stagnated. If I look at the UK in particular, it doesn't seem like much progress has been made in the past 10 years, maybe even 20 years. It's kind of just stagnant at best. Like people are not getting more economic opportunities. Young people are not necessarily feeling that they're going to live better lives than their parents did if they stay there. More increasingly, people are moving and going to US, going to Dubai, going to Spain, going to Australia, wherever they think they may have better opportunities. So increasingly, the country and other countries they're actually losing a lot of bright young minds and a lot of go-getters. And you're even having people leaving for safety concerns, or they just think, hey, I can have a better opportunity for myself and my children and my wider family elsewhere. And a lot of that is going on. So that would be my response to the way you kind of framed that post there.
I think it's really interesting. A great response, because there's so many really intelligent people that are having this conversation now, because most people don't want to. Like you said, right? You were picked up by some amazing podcasts and media outlets because you were having the conversations people wanted to have but were too afraid to do. And so I'd love to, in the last few minutes, just touch on 2 interviews that are synonymous with you that I think are really interesting. And I know you've done a couple of these ones, but the first one is the Joe Rogan experience, right? So the biggest podcast in the world. And so he invited you on, am I right in saying 2019?
Yeah, the first one, September 2019.
So what was that like? What was an experience?
Wow. Well, I'd been watching Joe's podcast regularly for several years. So he started following me because he saw the deadlift and he commented on it.
Oh, cool.
And we DM'd back and forth a little bit once he started following me. And I had a trip planned to the USA anyway. I was going to go to LA to do Dave Rubin's show, the Rubin Report. And so while I was in LA, Joe was still there. So I messaged him and said, it'd be an honor to do your show if he'd be interested in having me. And he was like, heck yeah, like when are you here? And so, wow, that was a surreal week in general. So it was my first time ever in California, first time ever in Los Angeles. And in 1 week, I remember I did the Rubin Report. The next day I did the Joe Rogan Experience. Next day, I think I was at the Daily Wire recording with Ben Shapiro.
Oh, yeah.
And like in 1 week, I just met a ton of people. I appeared on lots of these shows with millions of listeners. And again, I'm just an independent rapper from England who's suddenly sort of thrust into the hot seat in all of these different places. So with Joe's one particular, there was something a bit surreal about even just going into the room, because I'd seen that room and that table and this chair and mic set up so many times on my phone screen or on my laptop screen. And I'm there and like Joe's just in front of me and I'm a bit like, is this real? Like, this seems a bit weird. Like I'm actually here myself. But it was cool meeting him. I kind of felt like I already knew him.
Yeah.
I remember that. Like when I first met him, I was like, I feel like we've met before. Yeah. Like I've listened to so much of you that I already feel some type of connection here. But it was a great experience. It was a wonderful experience. He was very friendly. His whole team was. And I remember the following day just being out walking around in LA and, a couple cars even like driving past and being like, hey, Zuby, saw you on Rogan, or like, yo, Zuby was, right? Like in LA, like I'm in LA, big city, right? And because so many people listen to his show, right?
Yeah, so many.
And this was when I think he just like record them and release them. And it was before the Spotify deal. So they just go out on YouTube, remember?
Yeah.
And like millions of people would tune in with the first 24 hours. So suddenly I'm being recognized in a city I've never even been in before by people just coming up to me and being, oh yeah, man, I saw you on Rogan. And then later down the line, I ended up staying for 3 months in the US and I did so many different shows. I did my first appearance on Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
I went to the Blaze in Dallas and I recorded with, Glenn Beck and like I was just doing so many shows. And so I did some pieces on Fox News as well. And so I started to just like get recognized in all these random places I'd never been to before, in a country I'm not even from. And people are like, oh yeah, I heard what you were saying on Fox the other day, man. Like, I like you, I like I like what you're saying. And you're just like, whoa, this is kind of strange. That was a crazy trip, dude. I mean, I ended up getting invited to the Pentagon.
Oh, wow.
I got invited to the White House twice. Like I ended up in some strange rooms where I was just like, how am I even here?
Such a wild journey. Yeah. And so the second interview I'd love to hear about is you had Elon Musk on your podcast, right? This was after this had happened. It's after the Joe Rogan and...
Yeah, it's 2023.
2023. Oh, wow. Okay. So how did that come about?
Yeah. So Elon started following me beginning of 2023. Mm-hmm. I started noticing him replying to my tweets like late 2022. But I don't think he was following me. And then one day I got a message from a friend just saying like, yo, how long has Elon been following you? And I was like, what? Elon follows me? I think he only followed like 280 people at the time or something. And I went on his profile and, had the little follows you thing. And I was like, oh, interesting. And then I went in my DMs and he'd slid in my DMs.
No way.
I remember the first message just said Elon here. And then he was, asking me for some stuff, like some feedback regarding Twitter. It was still Twitter at the time. Yeah. And so we just started chatting in DMs and I was like, hey, I've got a podcast. It's called Real Talk with Zuby. It would be an honor to have you on sometime if you've got the time. And he was like, sure. And I was just like, sweet. Okay, cool. Wild. And then it was just a matter of logistics. It was just a matter of, I was in the UK at the time. And then I was going to be in the States a couple months later. So I was just communicating with him to work out where we could record it. And when he's a busy guy, he travels around a lot. So I was like, look, I'm happy to be as flexible as need be. If I need to last minute, fly to San Francisco or go to Austin or whatever, I'll do it. I'll make it happen. And we ended up recording in Twitter headquarters in San Francisco. This is before the rebrand. And that was also pretty surreal.
Yeah, it's a great conversation. Really
thank
is.
You.
What's the takeaway for you? Not just from the conversation, but also just from meeting him, being around him.
I've said this in a few interviews. For me, the biggest takeaway was a reaffirmation of humility. a reaffirmation of humility, because I've said before that if there were a man in this world who has a quote unquote right to be arrogant or prideful or to think that he's a bit better than everyone else or whatever, it would be this guy who's worth $400 billion and is the CEO of all these different companies and is just out there doing all this bonkers, crazy stuff and getting ridiculous amounts of praise and admiration. Sure, some hate and some skepticism as well, but, the guy's on a different planet in many ways. But in real life, I found him to be very friendly, very humble, very just down to earth. It was just like talking to a normal person. I didn't feel like, oh my gosh, like I'm talking to whatever. He was as happy to meet me as I was to meet him. And so it was just a constant reminder, especially as someone who's in the public eye to some degree, right? I don't have Elon fame and I wouldn't even want Elon fame, right? But as someone who is known by millions of people and who does receive a lot of validation or even praise, or like I've experienced all sorts of things over the years. And it's just a constant reminder of like, yeah, everyone's a person. We all have our ups and downs, our pros and our cons. There's no reason to ever be prideful or to be arrogant. Don't get gassed up. Don't, just always be down to earth. I'm already a down to earth person. I'd certainly like to think, and I think anyone who's ever met me in person would vouch for that. And a lot of people have met me in person. But it was just that constant reminder that however far things get for me in this mortal and materialistic world, to never put myself above other people or to think that I'm too famous or whatever, too big to talk to someone or whatever, anything like that. I didn't think that way anyway, but it was just a reminder of, there's no excuse for that.
I love that. And what a nice thing, or nice thing to hear about someone that you put on that pedestal and go, richest man alive, probably is a bit of an arse, but he turns out not to be and has humility, and you can learn so much from him. I think that's such a nice thing to hear, and it's so important. Obviously, you resonate really highly with that. Zuby, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I've enjoyed the conversation.
If you like these episodes, feel free to subscribe to our Healthy Hustle newsletter below, where you'll get behind the scenes information from our guests, as well as from the studio operator who helps us create these cinematic episodes. It's also full of business advice and tips, and it will help you join the community of healthy entrepreneurs.